and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we start off with a couple of bad news stories. The Supreme Court of the United States has ordered the state of Maine to fund anti-LGBTQ religious schools in the name of fighting discrimination.
Yeah, it's a terrible decision, one that we anticipated, and here it is. So we'll explain it in detail. And also, the world body regulating swimming and other water sports banned most trans women from competition.
In better news, as President Biden celebrated Pride in the White House, an out gay man is on deck to be his new chief counsel.
And we're going to show you a great video, an out Michigan legislator slamming Republican colleagues for blocking the state's Pride resolution.
Catholic bishop tells a Catholic school that they're not Catholic for flying a rainbow flag and a Black Lives Matter banner.
Yeah, but there's a good end to that story in some ways. Drag Queen Story Hour is in the crosshairs in New York and Arizona and, of course, everywhere else.
The Stonewall National Monument announces it will be getting a visitor center.
Really sort of heartwarming and sad news from Colorado, where Clela Rorex, the first county clerk in the United States of America to issue same-sex marriage licenses in 1975, has died. What a hero.
The British authorities denied health services to a 21-year-old man with HIV in prison, killing him.
And as monkeypox in the West spreads primarily among gay men, the CDC has issued safer sex guidelines and is producing 500,000 additional vaccines against it.
So the Supreme Court continues its reign of terror. This decision.
Oh, I think it's only beginning. It's only beginning.
Of course. I mean, it's a radical right majority. They have now decided to force taxpayers in Maine to fund religious education. The case is called Carson versus Macon. The court is saying that if you refuse to tax citizens, says that refusing to tax citizens to fund religion is discrimination against religion. This is not the American way, but that's what they decided. So now these schools that sued over this or were getting money, they what's the deal? They discriminate against LGBT. They discriminate against LGBTQ people. They discriminate against Muslims. They're right-wing religious schools, and now we have to pay for them. Now, why did this happen? I mean, Maine has this thing where if there's no public school in your area and there might be a private school, they'll give you a voucher to go there. And the Supreme Court says, well, if you fund other private schools and you're not funding religious schools, then you're being discriminatory against religion. But, in Ireland, all the schools are Catholic schools, basically. And the Catholic schools were finally told, you want to keep getting money, you're going to have to comply with the non-discrimination laws of the Republic of Ireland. But we don't do that here.
Well, this is the nub of the problem. When the government decided that they wanted to give vouchers for private schools, if they had stuck to just funding public schools, and the Supreme Court has said, if you do stick to just funding public schools, then you don't have to fund private schools, religious schools, any of this. It's all about whether you are being discriminatory in your funding of private schools that do discriminate. So the Supreme Court, as with the Philadelphia foster care case, they didn't say the government has to fund Catholic charities. They said there's something in your law that allows for exceptions to your support of anti-discrimination laws. So therefore, you cannot discriminate against Catholic charities in this context. Everyone misreads this and says the Supreme Court said you have to fund religious adoption agencies. That's wrong. It's about equal treatment. If they only funded agencies that and said that don't discriminate, then they could cut out Catholic charities. And if they only fund public schools, then they don't have to fund religious schools. But it's their muddying the waters by funding private schools that then opens up this window for religious schools to claim they've been discriminated against. And Maine fell into that trap. And now we're stuck with this. And the answer is for states to decide only to fund public schools.
And that's what Americans United for the Separation of Church and State is asking for. But the wall between church and state has been crumbling for a very long time. The Supreme Court has invalidated these Blaine amendments that many states passed back in the 1930s to say no funding except for transportation for religious schools. And the Supreme Court's been striking that stuff down. In New York City, they fund tons of religious services. What do the religious services do? They sign a piece of paper saying, we're not going to discriminate in hiring or in provision of services. And they don't investigate it. They don't look into it. They fund all these, these yeshivas in New York City that don't comply with the education laws of New York. So, it's been out the window for a long time.
Well, the federal government also funds colleges and universities that are religious and that discriminate, because these colleges and universities have been allowed to apply for exemptions to non-discrimination provisions in this kind of funding. We years ago had students on this program from Soul Force who were doing equality rides around the country to protest at religious colleges. Well, that work is continuing with an organization called REAP, REAP. I went to an event for them the other night, and they're still doing this work. And the federal government should not be supporting discriminatory organizations, be they educational, foster care, any kind of discriminatory organization should not be funded with taxpayer money. And yet it is in practice across the board. And this Supreme Court decision is just another step down that road.
And by the time you see this show in some parts of the country and the world, there may be more horrible decisions that have been handed down.
We're taping on Wednesday. There's another decision day on Thursday tomorrow. And yes, we're expecting more Armageddons.
More Armageddon. So in other news of discrimination, FINA, which is the governing body worldwide for swimming and other water sports, international competitions, right? They have barred trans women from competition unless they've gone through testosterone suppression before puberty or by age 12, whichever is later. And they're now going to have a new open category for athletes who identify as women, but who do not meet these requirements to compete against people, to meet the requirements to compete against people who were female at birth. 70%,
maybe they haven't set this up yet. They're saying maybe they will do that. 70%
of member federations voted aye on the new policy. There were no trans women at the World Championships, so they're legislating about a problem that doesn't exist. And there's only been one trans woman, a Canadian soccer player, who's ever won an Olympic medal.
Well, this is all Leah Thomas hysteria, and again, we will point out, as we do every time we mention her, that she has won some races, she has lost some races. This is not about some overwhelming winning record by trans women in swimming or other sports.
Now,
and highly ironic that they've made this rule when state after state in this country is trying to prevent trans youth from having puberty blockers to comply with this rule that FINA has just instituted.
Now, USA swimming rules are less restrictive, measuring testosterone levels, but FINA's move could spark other moves by national governing bodies. The new policy is going to require trans athletes to produce as many as 10 years or more of invasive medical records and blood tests. Athlete Ally branded the new policy deeply discriminatory, harmful, and unscientific. The ruling can be appealed to an arbitration board for sport, they have upheld inclusion based on testosterone levels.
And all these athletes have been complying with the rules that have been in place about length of time on testosterone suppressors, and have been competing in a way that complied with all the international rules. And now this throws them a new curveball. And by the way, the International Rugby League has barred trans women from competition in women's rugby. And the Cycling International Federation has also barred trans women from competition as they study all these things. It is a tsunami of discrimination sweeping the globe on the basis of fear and ignorance.
Indeed. Let's go to the White House.
Okay.
President Biden had his LGBTQ reception. There he is with everybody signing an executive order. He said, "We're in a battle for the soul of the nation," he said.
Well, his executive order lays out a number of things, including protecting access to health care, including mental health, tries to protect students from these new state laws, protect people from conversion therapy, including suggesting the FTC look at whether it should be looked at as needing consumer warnings.
It establishes a subcommittee on sexual orientation and gender identity in data collection, and it focuses on suicide prevention, creates a Bill of Rights for us.
But the National LGBTQ Task Force is not satisfied. They say
there's no mention of immigration issues, but there is a lot for LGBTQ youth.
No mention of violent extremists attacking us, and no real enforcement procedures for any of this. So they're not satisfied, but it's a long list of things from the Biden administration.
All right. So, the president's current White House counsel, Dana Remus, is set to depart next month, and she will be replaced by the top deputy, Stuart Dellery, who will be saddled with all the House Republicans demanding documents and testimony from White House personnel if the GOP prevails in the fall elections as expected.
Yes, I don't envy him that job. Meanwhile, a little screw up by the State Department. They were supposed to facilitate a phone call between Brittany Griner in Russian jail and her wife here in the United States. But the women tried a dozen times to get the phone call to go through. And it turns out it was on a weekend day, and the U.S. Embassy in Moscow is not staffed on the weekend, and therefore the phone call did not go through.
Wow.
Not a good sign about negotiations for Brittany Griner's potential release.
Well, Bill Richardson is on that case, so there is some hope. Just a brief note on the elections this week. in Georgia, out Imani Barnes won her runoff for a seat in the Georgia State House of Representatives. She first ran for the Tucker City Council down there because she saw no people of color on the council. She lost by a few votes, but she won this one. She's been a biomedical researcher for 18 years, lately at Emory University, and a youth development coach and parent advocate. But Rashawn Kemp lost his runoff for a state house seat.
Now, are they, excuse me for raising this and not understanding it better. I was reading up on these races. Were these runoffs to actually get the seat or for the Democratic nomination for the race in November for these seats?
I don't know. I imagine.
I'm not afraid to say I don't know. I don't know.
He doesn't know. I imagine it's for the nomination because they do have, because, you know, the race for governor and all that stuff hasn't happened yet. It's in the fall. These are runoffs for nominations. Yeah.
And Mondaire Jones is in a new little pickle in New York, running, current member of Congress, out gay man, running for a new district congressional seat.
That includes Lower Manhattan and Stonewall, and includes parts of Brooklyn.
Well,
it's 15 other people.
Because of COVID, the House instituted new rules where you didn't have to be present to vote. You could get another member of Congress to be your proxy for voting, so you wouldn't have to travel as much, and you could stay safe during COVID.
But he did travel.
Yeah, but he traveled to the south of France for Issa Rae's wedding. They knew each other at Stanford, they're friends, but people are not happy that he has used the COVID safety rules to get on an international flight and duck out on his congressional vote.
Well, speaking of the Stonewall, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services held their naturalization ceremony for dozens of people from 9 countries at the Stonewall National Monument there in the Village on June 17th. The director, Jadoo, was on hand along with the National Park Service leaders. Those naturalized there are not necessarily LGBTQ themselves, but the agency was emphasizing in its press release how much progress they're making in embracing LGBTQ families for immigration benefits.
They hold these ceremonies at various federal monuments, and so they held one at Stonewall. Very nice.
And they're also, another group is adding to the wall of honor around the Stonewall on the fence, I guess. James Hormel, the late Urvashi Vad, Stephen Sondheim, Tyler Clementi, and Dolores Alexander, who I had to be reminded was the first executive director of the National Organization for Women. When they found out she was a lesbian, out.
Well, sure. Betty Friedan.
Lavender Menace.
Yeah. For whom I worked for 3 days until I couldn't take it anymore. I said, I'm out of here.
I only met her later in life when she had mellowed a bit. 2 can play at the religious freedom game. A South Florida synagogue is challenging that state's law banning abortion at 15 weeks, saying it violates the state constitutional right to privacy and freedom and of religious freedom under Jewish law, where they say abortion is required if necessary to protect the health, mental or physical well-being of the person seeking it. So that's another way to go at this. Religious freedom. The Supreme Court likes those arguments.
Well, but here's another angle on it. A court in New York has ruled that Yeshiva University, a religious institution describing itself as a modern Orthodox university, must officially recognize the Yeshiva University Pride Alliance. Now, here's the trick on this one. The university had chartered itself as a secular institution, non-religious. And so the court said, well, you can't claim a religious exemption to non-discrimination rules if you're chartered as a secular institution.
Right. We had Yael Dayan from the Israeli parliament on the show once, and she kept emphasizing this is a secular state.
The reason Yeshiva chartered as secular was because they wanted to get government funding. They're now going to re-examine their chartering and reapply, especially since now the Supreme Court has told them that religious institutions can get government funding. But meanwhile, for the moment, the YU Pride Alliance is officially recognized and has access to whatever facilities other groups get on Yeshiva's campus.
Well, let's go to Michigan, where LGBTQ pride is no longer recognized by the Senate of there. The Senate blocked a resolution making June LGBTQ Pride Month, the same one they passed last year. So we have video here of Senator Jeremy Moss speaking out to his colleagues in the Senate.
Here we are again. I thought we were over this. But this month, the Senate majority has sent the LGBTQ Pride Month resolution to committee just so that they cannot adopt it, despite the fact that it is the same resolution that was adopted in June 2021 after so much labor to get it to that point, without even a period or a comma changed. I fought to get recognition finally adopted last year. Every year prior, it had been discarded without consideration. It is a non-binding resolution. It requires nothing of you. It doesn't change any law, although we should, and it doesn't cost you anything. When it was finally adopted last year, no one's marriage dissolved because of it, no business shuttered, no church lost its religious freedom. But this year, curiously, the Republican leadership regresses and again throws Pride Month back into the trash heap. I guess the cruelty is the point. It is a symbolic resolution, and its journey is symbolic of what you do to the LGBTQ community as well. No matter the progress, no matter the growing support, the Republican leadership will never stand for LGBTQ equality. They will never let marginalized communities fairly compete with everybody else. If you don't look like them, if you don't pray like them, if you don't raise your children like them, if you don't live in their communities, you are never allowed on a level playing field with them. And for those of you who do in the state of Michigan identify with them, they have nothing to offer you either, except to tear communities like mine down. The day that I introduced this resolution last week, there were no other votes on the agenda. 2 days later, when I pushed for its passage and it was not moved, there were no other votes on the agenda. They're in the majority now and have not solved any of our problems. Their agenda is to make you fear the gay agenda. But I am not the cause of your problems. My community is not the cause of your problems. I will tell you what the gay agenda is. I am a senator who is gay and leading the fight against price gouging of rising everyday costs that all Michigan families are worried about, that they have not addressed. I am a senator who is gay, working with my Senate Democratic colleagues, desperate to pass common sense gun reform to keep all communities safe from gun violence that they are blocking. I am a senator who is gay that, despite our political differences, am working with them on bipartisan proposals on affordable housing, economic development, and police reform. There are LGBTQ people like me in all sectors of Michigan's economy who only wish to contribute, be good neighbors, and not have the government interfere with their freedom to live their lives. The people of the state of Michigan understand, appreciate, and value the cultural, civic, and economic contributions of the LGBTQ community to the greater community of this state. That is a line directly from the Pride Month resolution that we adopted last year and that you won't adopt this year. This year is 2022. It's an election year, and instead you choose to exploit divisiveness and discard this resolution. They call people groomers only in 2022, but it doesn't solve your problems. They push Don't Say Gay only in 2022, but it doesn't solve your problems. They protest drag queens only in 2022, but it doesn't solve your problems. They prey on people's fears, but it doesn't solve your problem. We instead choose inclusion. We choose love. We choose respect. We choose human dignity. We choose pride. We are a community of good people. We don't need a piece of paper to tell us that. But the fact that you won't adopt it says a lot more about you than it does about us.
Jeremy Moss for president.
Please.
He was fantastic.
It about sums it up. And remember, whenever they talk about grooming, they're grooming you for fascism, obviously most intensely in Texas. The radical right Republican Party.
Can I just say before you move on that we're going to link to that speech in our show note so you can share it with people from there. So if you're not on our email list, go to gayusatv.org and sign up for that.
Put it on my Facebook page too, so you can share it there. So the radical right Republican Party in Texas defeated a motion to remove their plank that calls homosexuality an abnormal lifestyle choice. They also denied a booth to the gay Republicans. Even Donald Trump Jr. called the exclusion of gay Republicans from the state convention wrong.
They've been doing that for decades.
The party censored Senator Cornyn for participating in the bipartisan gun safety talks and declared President Biden not legitimately elected. Now, the Republic of Texas, and I love many people down there, by the way, could become a republic once more, and keep us. But, by the way, they also offered compensation to trans people who detransition. It's just unbelievable.
Well, they want to secede. It's always a tempting thought, but I feel for all the people in Texas who are not them, who would be hurt by that. So I'm not in favor of cutting them off. But look, even John Cornyn, who they condemned roundly for working on a gun control moderate proposal, ignored them and went ahead and did the gun control bill. So they're a very, very small minority at that convention. In Hawaii, the governor there has signed some pro-LGBT bills, very refreshing these days. We don't hear much about that. So thank you to him for that.
Let's go back to Michigan for a second, where out-state Attorney General Dana Nessel said, drag queens make everything better, and there should be a drag queen in every school. Now, she was speaking at a civil rights conference in Lansing, and she acknowledged her proposal had not been poll tested.
But it might do very well. Who knows? But not in Worcester. Well, maybe in Worcester, Mass. In Worcester, Mass, there is a Catholic school, the Nativity School, which has for a while been flying a rainbow pride flag and a Black Lives Matter flag. This is a Jesuit school.
Predominantly Black student body.
Yep.
And the kids wanted this done because they wanted these banners flying.
Yep.
So Bishop McManus, who is the Bishop of Worcester, says this somehow is contrary to church teaching, but more so to his authority. So the president of the school is appealing his decision. He is saying, if you do this, you are no longer a Catholic school. You cannot have mass on the campus. You cannot administer any sacraments on the campus. He's asserting his authority. And it's really absolutely horrible.
Well, I won't get into being in favor of all those things.
This is the way the bishop wanted to celebrate Juneteenth.
The Disney company has announced that it is delaying for several years its plan to move a couple thousand jobs from California to Florida. They were going to avoid some California taxes by doing so, but they're no longer willing to give DeSantis any wins. So they've said, nope, not until 2026 at the earliest will we move those jobs.
Okay.
Also, it turns out DeSantis has, Adam Laxalt, who has now been nominated by the Republicans, very heavy right winger, to be the candidate for senator from Nevada. He's a lawyer, and his law firm is being paid millions by DeSantis on all the court cases against DeSantis's "Don't Say Gay" bills and everything else.
Okay, in Arizona, we have a governor candidate named Kari, Kari Lake, who said they kicked God out of the schools and they welcomed the drag queens. Now, she apparently has an old friend, close friend, who was a drag artist, Rick Stevens, who says, I performed at her house and in front of her daughter, her elementary school daughter. She claimed a performer was a Marilyn Monroe impersonator, not a drag queen. And then it's discovered, if you go to the next
What's
picture,
the difference?
the one on the left in this picture is Kari Lake in drag as Elvis. So she used to be a liberal Democrat, but she discovered bigotry sells, and she became a Republican, and she's been campaigning against us. It's not very nice.
No, not nice at all. All right, let's go to North Carolina, where the Gaston, North Carolina Museum removed a couple of pictures from an exhibit by a photographer, Grant Baldwin, a very well-known and popular photographer.
Photojournalist.
Yes, of two men kissing, and the other of a Black Lives Matter protester being arrested rather roughly by the police.
She was protesting a Confederate statue. A lot of this is in Charlotte, North Carolina. So, they say, like with this picture, we can't show city employees in these pictures.
And the two men kissing, they said, well, it was not considerate of differing viewpoints in the community.
Well, that's North Carolina. And, well, of course, by the way, they have made these pictures world famous. They're all over the world in stories about how censorious you are. And then the Smithtown Public Library on Long Island voted to remove all pride displays and LGBTQ books from the children's section.
But a gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico is picking up those photographs for an exhibit there. So,
all right, Ann, let's go to Lincoln, Nebraska.
Okay, hold on. Yes. So the Lincoln, Nebraska City Council in the beginning of the year passed a non-discrimination ordinance, February, I think it was.
Unanimously.
Yes, 7-member city council. And it's a non-discrimination ordinance that includes sexual orientation and gender identity. So the right wing there immediately sprang into action and started collecting petition signatures for a public referendum to rescind the ordinance. And the city council hemmed and hawed and thought, what are we going to do about this? And decided they didn't like the idea of a public referendum on civil rights. So they voted 4-3 to rescind the ordinance themselves, thereby canceling the proposed public referendum.
Well,
those who voted to rescind it were the 4 men on the council, 2 of whom are gay, and the ones who said, no, look, the city has already voted for us. 2 gay men, 1 lesbian, Black people. We have more faith in the public than that. We don't think we should rescind this. So the 3 women on the council, including 1 lesbian, voted against rescinding the.
Well, one of the gay people who voted to rescind to avoid these referenda are awful. And one of the Black women said, we should never have these up for a public vote.
Right.
But they also pointed out, for employment purposes, people are covered by the Bostock decision of the Supreme Court, which says you can't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
Yes, but that means going to court and asserting that right. And does it cover public accommodations? Does it cover housing? You don't want to get rid of these ordinances, and it sets a very bad precedent to cave to the right wing by rescinding the ordinance. Now, Do I know how the referendum would go? I do not. And would it be an ugly fight? Yes, it would. So I'm not saying this was a wrong decision on their part, but it's questionable at least.
All right. In New York City, we told you about a Trumpian city council member, Vicky Palladino from Queens, who said that she would defund schools in her district if they had drag storytellers, a power she does not have, and calling the program a form of child grooming and sexualization. Outrageous comments. Drag Story Hour in New York City is a program. There's an example of it. So Mayor Adams, citing the increasing attacks on LGBTQ communities, said the goal of education is not only that children be academically intelligent, but also emotionally intelligent. And drag storytellers and the libraries and schools they support foster the love, diversity, personal expression, and literacy that is at the core of what encompasses our city. I thought it was a great statement.
I would expect nothing less. He also announced some new funding for LGBTQ programs, $6.7 million.
Which is not a lot of money in New York.
No.
For a community that has been neglected all these years. But by the way, I've looked over that list of what they're funding. It does include some, pretty compelling things like legal services, $1.5 million to promote family acceptance to reduce homelessness, trying to get families not to throw their kids out. $3 million for formerly homeless LGBTQ people to aid homeless LGBTQ youth. And this caught my eye. $350,000 for LGBTQ plus New Yorkers who have experienced religious hate. That's it's gotta,
These are all great. As you point out, it's still not a lot of money. I'll be interested to see how, I look at these government programs and I always wonder, are they anything but just employment programs for bureaucrats, or are they really getting anything done?
By the way, going back to Vicky Palladino, the city council is up in arms, and the LGBTQ caucus wants her removed from her committee assignments for her bigotry.
Well, she's our own Marjorie Taylor Greene. She always has been. She was when she first ran for this seat, and she's to call her an outlier would be a compliment. Let's move to the governor's race, because the Democrats had a debate the other night and managed to talk about the...
So the NBC moderator asked, should sexual orientation and gender identity lessons be included in mandated in elementary school, as some want? Oh boy! So the right-wing Democrat there on the left, Tom Suozzi.
No, on the right. On the right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at different pictures. Sorry. Yeah, Tom Suozzi's there on the right, the white guy. He said, I wouldn't teach children under 5th grade about sexual orientation or about genitalia or about sexuality. Now, of course, that's exactly what's in the Don't Say Gay bill. So Kathy Hochul there in the middle, who is the governor, our current governor, she said, well, you supported Don't Say Gay, and he acted like he didn't, but he just basically said that he did. And all they think about when they hear a sexual orientation is sex, sex, sex. And Kathy Hochul was going on about, well, we need parental involvement and we need local school boards to make these decisions. But then in the next breath, they're asked about, what about Asian American education? Oh, yes, 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 mandated across the board. Now, Jumaane Williams was more nuanced about this. He said, of course, I support this kind of inclusion. And of course, it all has to be age appropriate. But wow, this group.
90% of people running for office these days, it feels like. In Ohio, Republicans are still pushing to ban trans girls from school sports, but they're going to remove the genital inspection mandate in order to get the bill passed.
Right.
Starbucks is threatening those who are trying to unionize their stores by saying, well, if you unionize, then you're going to have to negotiate things like health benefits for trans workers, and you may just lose that benefit. DeSantis is going ahead with his proposal for no Medicaid coverage of trans health care.
Yep.
With
For anybody.
yeah.
Not just young people, for anybody.
Yep.
This has got to, if that's not unconstitutional.
All right, let's
tell
skedaddle.
us about Marie King and the trans senior rejected.
Well, can we first can we talk about yes, Marie King in Jonesport, Maine, Sunrise Assisted Living. They settled a complaint because they had rejected her, trans woman, 79 years old, for admission. They have agreed to a non-discrimination policy, training of staff, blah, blah, blah. And she's now happily settled elsewhere. But, 79, and she has to fight this battle with an assisted living facility.
Now, Penny Marshall made a movie back in the 20th century called A League of Their Own about professional women baseball players during World War II. And, it's a good movie, but it did not deal with people being lesbians, even though it starred Rosie O'Donnell, among others. But what happened, Anne?
Well, Amazon Prime has now made a new version that's going to be a series starting on August 12th. And they held a screening of the first episode or two at the Tribeca Film Festival. And one of the honored guests was one of the players in the original league, Maybelle May Blair, now 95 years old. And what did she do at the Tribeca Festival? She came out.
It's never too late.
95. Rosie O'Donnell, by the way, is going to be in the series, not as a player anymore, but
the bartender or something.
Yeah, but congratulations, Maybelle. We're delighted to welcome you to the Out family.
Okay, you ready for some new flags? They keep proliferating.
Quickly.
Non-binary people who are attracted to women call themselves trick-sick, a new word for me, and they have unfurled a trick-sick flag. Until recently, non-binary people didn't have words for their sexual orientations. They also use the term Orbesian. Now, non-binary people attracted to men are calling themselves Tauric, and they have a new flag. They actually have two, but this is one of them.
All right. In New York City, the Stonewall Inn is adding a visitor center. Actually, this is a federal event. The Stonewall National Monument is behind this. The building on the right will be the new visitor center. Groundbreaking.
It all was the bar back in '69, but they were two separate spaces. So the bar's on the left. This new visitor center is going to be on the right. So on June 24th, they're going to have a big ceremony at 10:30 in the morning. On Friday, it's going to be live streamed by Pride Live YouTube site. We will link in the email.
And we want to mourn the death, but really celebrate the life of Cleela Rorex. Died at 78. There she is that's actually in 1974, just as she was running for office as county clerk of Boulder, Colorado, Boulder County. And when she assumed office at the beginning of 1975, a couple of men came to her. They wanted a marriage license. They'd been rejected in Colorado Springs and urged to go to Boulder, a more progressive place. So Cleela, the brand new county clerk, thought to herself, and asked an assistant attorney general of the state, can I do this? And he said, there is no gender specificity in the marriage law, so there's nothing to prevent you. And Cleela was a very progressive person who was doing all sorts of things to expand voter rights and other issues. And she gave them a marriage license. And she ended up giving 6 couples marriage licenses, male couples, female couples. And then she got shut down by the attorney general of the state and told, cut this out, because they were getting horrible publicity.
Johnny Carson called it Wacky Town because they did this.
I remember it at the time. I remember when it happened. It was fascinating news and very visionary. And she was a young woman in her early 30s who did this. She quit after her first term. She didn't run for re-election because she had been so harassed, moved to California with a husband. She was a straight ally and a lifelong one.
She finished finished her career as a legal administrator for the Native American Rights Fund. That picture with Governor Polis, by the way, that's when they were putting Boulder Courthouse on the National Register of Historic Places in 2019, partly because of its role in this whole thing.
She was terrific.
In North Carolina, trans Latina Sasha Mason, 45, was murdered in Zebulon last Friday in a hail of bullets, apparently from men she knew. 2 suspects were arrested, charged with conspiracy to commit robbery with a dangerous weapon. Well, we'll see that they add, if they upgraded to murder. It's the 16th such killing this year.
And Elon Musk's 18-year-old daughter, trans daughter, has gone to court to say, I don't want anything to do with him. I want to change my name. I'm changing my gender.
I don't care how much money he has.
Goodbye.
Get me out of here.
All right, let's move to international news quickly.
In Ramallah, a concert for the LGBTQ community was called off after threats from Palestinian activists. It was to be headlined by singer there, Bashar Murad, who is Palestinian and gay, and who says there's barely any LGBTQ representation in the Middle East. The protest that stopped this was by the son of a Hamas preacher who, prophesizes that Israel will cease to exist this year. The son says he's defending religion and those fighting for Palestinian freedom. The Palestinian Authority itself has banned LGBTQ events in the West Bank in 2019.
But Israel has announced it's letting LGBT Palestinians have work licenses and health care. In the UK, in Sussex, England, a trans woman, Steph Marsh, is doing an ad campaign on behalf of trans people. She's been abused terribly as a paramedic by patients who reject her and harass her when she comes to the door to help them.
She's also gotten a lot of support from her colleagues. In New Zealand, the New Zealand Darts Association banned a trans woman from a women's darts tourney because they said, we don't have a policy on it. We'd like to do it, but we don't have a policy on it. She's a legal female. The head of the group says they'll work on making it inclusive.
We're watching, hopefully, the country of Colombia, which has elected the progressive candidate for president, Gustavo Petro, on the left, and the vice president,
Francia
Marquez. Good luck to them.
They are pro-LGBTQ.
In Ukraine, there's a new war crimes investigator who is telling horrible stories of gay men being raped and castrated and executed by Russian soldiers. This investigator vows that we will pursue justice completely.
And in Ireland, they did a poll of Catholics. 96% of Catholics there are in favor of women becoming deacons or priests. 85% expressed grave concern about the church's exclusion of LGBTQ people, and 70% want more lay involvement. So progress.
In Thailand, the legislature is working on marriage and civil unions bills after the Constitutional Court wouldn't overturn the legal ban on them, saying that the legislature had to do it. And in Japan, the Osaka District Court says the marriage ban there is constitutional. They have had different opinions by courts in different districts there in Japan. Okay. In Essex, in the UK, Essex, England, they're doing an inquest because Thokozani Shiri, 21 years old, died in prison because he was denied HIV medications.
21 years old.
Days before his death, he was put in a prison hospital in an induced coma and shackles.
Not given antiretrovirals during his first. He had 2 short stretches in prison. The last one ended in his death. Not given antiretrovirals during the first stretch. Told the prison officials he couldn't breathe, needed to go to the hospital. It's just a heartrending story. The UK is famous for brutal prisons, just like the one Oscar Wilde went to back in the 1890s. prisons say they're making reforms, but they gave this guy a death sentence.
In other AIDS news and health news, the World Trade Organization has a provision that says poor countries have a right to violate patents of drugs to get access to generic versions for HIV, other diseases. Well, the World Trade Organization has rejected the latest request for that kind of expanded access to COVID vaccines, tests, and treatments to poor nations. And who supported them making that rejection? The United States and Europe, upholding the profits of pharmaceutical companies around the world.
Well, it looks like they're going to make some money off monkeypox. So the CDC has ordered 500,000 additional doses of a vaccine, and it's being ramped up around the world. It continues to spread, but in the U.S. and the rest of the West, it is primarily among gay men. So I am impressed that the CDC came out with very explicit safer sex guidelines for people to, if they want to avoid monkeypox, especially if you have a partner who has it. So they say, have virtual sex. These are all very explicit, and we're going to link to this. Masturbate 6 feet apart. Have sex with clothing on, or avoid or cover your rash areas. Avoid kissing. Wash hands and sex toys and fabrics. Limit your number of partners. So, well, this is the kind of stuff they ought to have come out with. Well, couldn't be right at the very beginning of the AIDS pandemic because they didn't know what caused it. But it should have come out earlier, and they're doing it at least.
And they tried to. The Surgeon General, Coop, tried to put out these things and was barred by the Reagan administration.
Right.
All right. Entertainment news. I want to tell you about this movie I watched, Potato Dreams of America. Okay. Now, when I heard about this movie, I thought, Potato Dreams of America, is this this have to do with Idaho? What's going on here? So I watched the movie. Well, this is a mother and young son who are Russian and who want desperately to get out of Russia. So she makes herself available as a mail order bride to an American, and they end up in America. Now, why is it called Potato Dreams of America? Not because they're going to Idaho. It's because the kid is known as Potato.
And he's gay.
Yes, he is.
Away?
Yeah, no, that's fine. He is gay, and it's all about his development from a young gay boy through his high school years, and there's a twist about the guy who marries her and brings her to America. They're in Seattle, but I just cannot get over the fact that this kid is called Potato, and I think we all need vegetable and fruit nicknames. You can work on yours.
Careful.
I've decided I'm going to be Fig.
Fig?
Fig.
That could be, okay.
I'm open to suggestion. Carrot, asparagus.
What vegetable is Leah Delaria? She is featured in this film.
She is his grandma in the film. And almost unrecognizable, but charming as the grandma. It's a very charming film. It's available on
Amazon Prime Video, but you have to rent it, right?
But for like 99 cents. But they're issuing a Blu-ray version now. It came out last year, but it is available on a number of services. Potato Dreams of America is a very charming film. It jumps the shark a little at the end, but it's a very cute, warm-hearted film.
And I'm only showing you this next picture because I liked it. It's from a play called Star-Crossed in London. It's a new riff on Romeo and Juliet in London, but it's not the Star-Crossed. This is centers the characters you're looking at there. It's a romance between Mercutio and Tybalt, and I hope it makes it here. It got fantastic reviews. It's very much in the vein of Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and it's by a woman named Rachel Garrett. I will be on the lookout for it.
I would suspect it will make it here in one form or another eventually, wouldn't you think? Because first of all, it's got a small cast.
3 people. So you got Mercutio and Tybalt, and then one other person plays everybody else in the play.
We were also alerted by a viewer to something currently running on some PBS channels, but also available on demand. LA, A Queer History. We haven't seen it, but it's a two-part documentary about the history of LGBTQ people and movements in LA, which we don't see enough of because everybody's so New York centric.
Well, I mean, the thesis of these documentaries is that they beat us to it. That they invented gay culture.
Well, look, I resist that because I think the Greeks and before them invented gay culture. There is to suggest that gay culture appeared even in the last century is insane. It's been around forever. Right. So please, let's not do those kinds of things. Well,
the first part is called Culture and Criminalization. The second part, Protests and Parades. And it is online, and we will link to it. If you go to pbs.org, I was able to watch some of it today.
Well, they're not handing out any medals for who came first in this stuff. So I think these kinds of fights are ridiculous. Meanwhile, I saw an ad today for a new show on Hulu coming on Friday, Mormon No More, about a woman who leaves Mormonism and hooks up with another woman. And it, the ad was appealing. I don't know whether the show will be, but it'll be on Hulu starting on this Friday, the 24th.
Well, what are we doing on Sunday, Anne?
Well, first, there's one other thing that I haven't gotten a chance to look at yet, but the more I read about it, the more I want to. First Kill on Netflix, the lesbian vampire show. The vampire and the vampire hunter who get together, although they should be killing each other. Friday night, the drag march here in New York. Saturday night, the Dyke March, starting at 5 o'clock from Bryant Park and marching down Fifth Avenue to Washington Square Park, as it has for decades now. And on Sunday, we have the dueling Pride Parade and March. The regular Pride Parade, which has a shorter and shorter route every year. They're just going to be standing in one place and twirling in a circle. But the Queer Liberation March returns for its 4th edition on Sunday, a little later in the day to be a little more civilized, I guess, gathering at Foley Square downtown starting about 1 p.m.
Between 1 and 2, but it's not going to kick off until 2 from Foley Square.
Yes, stepping off at 2 and marching up 6th Avenue to Washington Square Park. And again this year, there will be a health fair on that block of Thompson Street just south of Washington Square Park. They did one last year, ACT UP, and it was fantastic. And TAG, the Treatment Action Group, is also co-sponsoring this year. I really recommend the health fair on Thompson Street below.
Well, that's where I'm going because there's a lot to protest and there's a lot to support, and that's what it's about.
So enjoy Pride Weekend and everything subsequent. We'll be back next week to tell you what happened and tell you about more.
Happy Christopher Street Liberation Day.